Shouldn't we be speaking to the patient before we start diagnosing?
Is she a doctor?
No, but
Everybody lies.
Nobody actually tells the truth. Not to doctors, not to people they love, not even to themselves. House figured that out before he ever set foot in a hospital, and it made him the best diagnostician alive, while making it impossible for him to trust a single person in his life. Today, we're going to break down exactly how he learned to read every lie, every hesitation, everything people tried to hide. But the real question isn't how he knew everyone was lying. It's what that did to him every single day. Everybody lies. He said it so many times, it stopped sounding like a belief and started sounding like a personality quirk, something to put on a mug. But House didn't say it because it was clever. He said it because he had spent his entire life proving it true, and more importantly, because knowing it gave him something nobody else in that hospital had. A starting point that was never wrong. Every other doctor walks into a patient room with an open question. What's happening here? House walked in with a closed one. What's being hidden and why? That shift, from gathering information to uncovering concealment, sounds like cynicism. It wasn't. It was method. And the difference between those two things is what separated House from every diagnostician who came before and after him. But here's the part the show never quite said out loud. House didn't learn to detect lies from medicine. He learned it long before that, and the place he learned it is the place that made everything else possible. Watch how House reads people, not what they say, how they say it. The pause before an answer, the eye movement that happens a half second too late, the specific way someone's posture changes when a question gets close to something they don't want found. He doesn't listen to words the way other doctors do. He listens to the gap between what words are supposed to mean and what the body does at the same moment. That's not a diagnostic skill. That's something you develop when you spend years in an environment where the official version of events and the actual version of events are two different things. Where you learn early that the people closest to you will say one thing and mean another, and that survival depends on closing that gap faster than they expect. House grew up with a father whose discipline was absolute and whose affection was conditional. Not cruel in any dramatic way, just consistently operating on a set of rules that were never fully explained and never quite applied the way they were supposed to. A household where the stated reason for something and the real reason were rarely the same. Where reading the room wasn't optional, it was how you got through the day without a collision you didn't see coming. He learned to watch, specifically, constantly, without letting anyone know he was doing it. By the time he got to medicine, that skill had been running for decades. The patients weren't a new problem. They were a familiar one in a different context. People hiding things from authority figures. People protecting versions of themselves that didn't match what their bodies were actually doing. People presenting one story while a completely different one played out in the details they didn't think anyone was tracking. House was always tracking. The thing about lying that most people misunderstand is that it's not really about deception, no particular desire to discuss. Cameron thought House was performing cynicism, that underneath the belief that everybody lies was a man who actually handled these moments that the show repeated across 8 seasons without ever drawing attention to it. When a patient lied badly, obviously transparently, in a way that any reasonably observant person would catch, House didn't call it out immediately. He filed it. He continued the conversation as if he'd accepted the answer, asked 2 or 3 questions about something else entirely, and then came back to the lie from a completely different angle. Not to expose the patient, to understand the shape of what was being protected, because the lie itself was never the point. The architecture of the lie was the point. What someone chooses to conceal, and how carefully they conceal it, tells you more about what's actually wrong than the concealed information itself. A patient who lies smoothly about their drug use, but gets genuinely distressed when asked about their family, is telling you something. Not in words, in the distribution of their anxiety. House read that distribution the way other doctors read test results. Foreman argued with this constantly. His objection was always some version of the same thing. You can't treat patients like suspects. You can't build a diagnostic process on distrust. Medicine requires a baseline of good faith between doctor and patient, or the whole system breaks down. He wasn't wrong as a general principle, but he was wrong about House, because House wasn't applying distrust, he was applying precision. There's a difference between assuming someone is lying and knowing how to read what they're concealing without making it a moral judgment. House never seemed angry at patients for lying. Watch his face in those moments. When a patient finally admits the thing they'd been holding back, there's something in House's expression that looks almost like relief, not satisfaction at being proven right, something quieter. The specific ease of a person who has been waiting for a conversation to become honest and is finally in one. He responded to truth the way most people respond to trust, like it was rare enough to be worth noticing. That response tells you something about what it cost him to operate the way he operated. Every conversation, every patient intake, every interaction with a colleague was running on 2 tracks simultaneously. The surface track, what was being said, what was being asked, what the official version of the situation was, and the second track, what the body language, the timing, the specific choice of words was revealing underneath. Maintaining both tracks at once, continuously, across every interaction in every room, is exhausting in a way that most people never have to experience. House had been doing it since childhood. By the time he became a doctor, it was no longer a choice. It was just how his mind processed human beings, which meant he was never fully off, never fully at rest in a conversation, even with Wilson. Even in the moments that looked like genuine ease, some part of him was still tracking, still noting the pause, the hedge, the thing Wilson almost said and redirected. Not because he suspected Wilson of anything specific, because the mechanism didn't have an off switch. Wilson understood this, at least partially. There were moments, brief, quickly closed, where Wilson said something with a specific kind of deliberate simplicity that seemed designed to give House nothing to read, statements without subtext, observations without implication, as if Wilson had learned, over years, that the only way to have a conversation with House that felt like genuine contact was to occasionally strip out everything that could be interpreted as anything other than what it was. Those moments never lasted. House would find the edge anyway, the place where even deliberate simplicity had a shape that revealed something about why it was being deployed. He couldn't stop, and he knew he couldn't stop. And somewhere in that knowledge was the part of House that the Vicodin was actually managing. Not the leg pain, but the exhaustion of a mind that processed every human interaction as a diagnostic problem and had no mechanism for putting the work down. The patients got better because of it. Every patient who walked out of Princeton Plainsboro alive after the other hospitals had given up on them, they walked out because House had learned, in a context that had nothing to do with medicine, to treat concealment as data and silence as symptom. The skill that saved them was the same skill that made sustained intimacy with him nearly impossible. Because you can't turn off the part of your brain that reads the edit in what people say without also turning off the part that lets you receive what people mean. House could hear the lie in a patient's story from across a room. He could not hear the sincerity in Wilson's loyalty without immediately looking for what it was covering. Not because he doubted Wilson, because the mechanism applied universally. Sincerity and deception run on the same hardware. You can't get better at detecting one without getting better at detecting the other. And you can't get better at detecting either without eventually being unable to simply receive what someone is giving you without running it through the filter first. That's not a contradiction. It's the same thing operating in two directions simultaneously. The people who loved him paid for it in a different kind of currency. The specific cost of being with someone who hears everything you say and is constitutionally unable to take it at face value. Not because he doesn't want to, because wanting to isn't enough when the mechanism is that deeply installed. Cameron spent years trying to reach the version of House who could simply believe her. Cuddy spent years trying to have conversations with him that didn't immediately become diagnostics. Wilson, who understood the mechanism better than anyone, learned to operate around it, giving House enough to read so the tracking had somewhere to go, while quietly protecting the things he actually needed House not to analyze too closely. It was an accommodation, a sophisticated decades-long accommodation to a mind that couldn't be turned off. And House, who saw all of this clearly, who understood exactly what his particular kind of intelligence cost the people around him, never found a way to make it work differently, not because he didn't try, because the skill and the damage were the same thing. You couldn't surgically remove the part that hurt people without removing the part that saved them. He still walks into every room, already knowing something is being hidden. The only question, the one he's been asking since before he knew what medicine was, is where, and he's still looking.